Whenever you're questioning, well, the student is so good at this, how can they not get that? Or it never occurred to me that this student could ever do this. That's like a hint that you're working with someone who is neurodivergent. So moving along, that was an academic catastrophe, a social catastrophe in kindergarten. Teachers didn't know how to reach me. Spent most of my time in the back of the room, just like some people are sitting way in the back. However, you're paying attention. Whereas me, I spent most of my time reading books on my favorite subjects, such as music, aviation, space exploration, earthquakes, dinosaurs, all kinds of things. And sometimes even wonder if there was more to school than reading my favorite books, like doing math in groups. There was a lot of bullying. Now on to middle school, you don't need to be autistic to have difficulty in middle and high school. But for me, it was actually easier. 2 reasons. One, I figured out that using words instead of sound effects from the environment really helped with social interaction. And second, middle and high school is where you start seeing courses, clubs, and activities based on interests. Music being one of mine, I joined the band. And you can get the same effect by teaching students in the School of Rock as well. It becomes a place where a neurodivergent individual, even if they fall flat in academics, will become a real place to shine. And of course, being autistic and taking things to extremes, I decided that I needed to learn how to play all the instruments. So I would spend hours in the instrument closet, taking instruments apart, like the watches, sometimes combining 2 or 3 instruments into these horrific contraptions that never should have seen the light of day. And, well, I didn't learn them all, but I did get it up to about 15. And then when I learned that a requirement for a degree in music education was you had to learn all the instruments, well, that was the thing to do. Off to university, studying music education, bachelor's, master's, all my doctoral coursework. And then after I finished that, it was time for the qualifier exams. Some autistic and neurodivergent things were kind of getting in the way of completing that, which I could talk about at a later time. Again, that widely varying skill set, amazing skills here, but some things falling flat over here. And then autism started becoming more interesting to me. And so I defected to the School of Education and got my doctorate in special education. You see a picture of my wife there. Autistic people meet others through common interests. School of Rock's a great place. They're interested in music. Everybody's all into music. Great place to be. My wife, she comes from the People's Republic of China, principal harpist for 9 years before coming to the US. And we've been married for almost 34 years. All the credit goes to her. And with autism and with neurodivergence, there's such great diversity in the autistic spectrum, in neurodivergency. There may even be greater diversity within this area than outside of this area. Which is why I often say, when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So these are some of the books that I've written. Some of them are translated into other languages. If you want to learn another language, or you read better in another language, you can check out my books in these languages. And now we're on to Karen.
Okay. Well, I can't remember a time in my life when I wasn't around music. My grandmother was an opera singer, so, I just were brought up with her singing the octaves, and I learned to play the piano and French horn. I joined the orchestra, and we had a teacher named Dr. Bobo from Venezuela who taught me French horn for 3 years. We were always surrounded by music. I played all kinds of music for my kids as they were growing up too. So I have 7 kids, and 2 of them are on the spectrum. One has autism and one's neurodivergent because he never got a label. He was one of the kids that falls through the cracks And you don't get the supports that you really need for the kids that fall through the cracks. It can be very challenging. Jonathan is doing really well, but I mean, he is autistic, and he loved music. And he also memorizing things over and over and over again. And he'd run around the room, like when we were at parties, and he'd say the same things over and over and over again. EXIT out the door, EXIT out the door. So he knew how to read, it helped him with his language. He started reading at 2.5, and I think I attribute some of that to the fact that we were always playing music and always had songs in our house. My sister and I harmonized growing up, and we wanted to start a girl band back in the day, but then that wasn't allowed. We went to all the concerts, like the Doors concert, and I actually ended up with a deposition of the Doors concert. But I just love the memorabilia, love the music, love the playfulness of it, and this guy right here, that's one of our common interests. We sang our way around Hawaii for 2 weeks, and he played the trombone,
Right.
and I played the French horn, with a mouse. Of course, we were just sitting there trying.
I sang the trombone, and
I sang
you
the French
sang
horn.
the French horn. Yes.
So I think all music is great, all the way from orchestra music to country to rock to anything. Everything is all good. You learn from it. You can teach kids music through it. It's a good way to remember things that you want to remember, like going out of the house. My mom would always say, do a sing-song, white paper, just anyway. I'm not going to do that for you. I'll spare you. But harmony also. Learning harmony teaches you in life how to get along with other people. You just blend in and you work with people and teaches resilience and understanding and all these different values. And we can integrate that into, like for everybody's teaching, neurodivergent, neurotypical, and autistic people, and teach everybody the same way. Because I think everybody loves the fun and the joy and the playfulness of music.
Yeah, absolutely.
I call creativity a paintbrush of humanity. And my palette is filled with colors, notes, poetry, dance, and everything in between.
And here are some of your books.
Right, yes. And the first book I wrote is called Little Rain Man. And that's a mozo no to say that now. Because you don't say Rain Man, but back in the day, that's when the movie came out. I did it in 1996. And it's a book illustrated by an autistic person. And some of the things in the slides, the pencil drawings in the slides, I used both by Temple Grandin and also in my book. So there's also art, things like that, things that are creative, because creativity is very similar. So we had 2 autism books, and they had 99 artists that have autism, or autistic was an appropriate thing to say nowadays.
Well, most autistic people who can think about and talk about these things prefer what is known as identity-first language.
But that was not
in those
days. It was like,
yeah. So we're not people with autism. We don't carry autism around in a bag and hopefully don't forget our autism. And just like you're not people with musicianism or with rock musicianism.
Yeah,
you're rock musicians. So we're autistic.
So one of the books that I did was Chicken Soup for the Soul, Children with Special Needs. And that wasn't my title either, but they didn't think autism was a big deal at the time. So they thought they better cover everything. Anyway, it's filled with a lot of different stories for parents, mothers, teachers, professionals. Stories with kids with autism, they can be hilarious. Flooding the bathroom floor, sliding across it, just all kinds of things. They're very good stories. So, and then Autism 101 has 53 autism experts in the field, including this guy, and Temple Grandin and Derek Curzon. There's lots of information, kind of the 101 of autism. So enough about me.
All right.
Carry on.
So we carry on. And
This is Rick.
I just have a couple of slides. I want to have more time for these folks to speak, obviously. But this is some statistics about the instructor training that has already happened We have over 2,580 people have completed that training. We're very, very, very proud of that. I'll go to the next one. Just keep going here. I got it. So I had a couple quotes though in the training. As you all know, there's areas to leave feedback, and these two quotes really spoke to me. Extremely informative and helpful in understanding how to work with autistic and neurodiverse music students. And I love the second one. Very pleased with your representation of the autistic community. As an autistic musician myself, I appreciate the emphasis given on the subject. So autism and neurodiversity is not just for students. We have staff, we have parents, right? So this is all a bigger conversation. But I want you to get back to your content. Enough of me. They've heard me talk a lot before, so I would rather have the spotlight on y'all.
Okay.
All right, so rolling along, we're throwing the words neurodiversity, neurodivergent, neurodivergence. What do they mean? So when we talk about neurodiversity, that's all of us. Different people think in different ways. There's huge diversity in how all of us think. And by the way, it's perfectly fine with me if you take pictures, because this stuff is meant to be shared. And neurodivergence, or neurodivergent individual, is someone who thinks more differently than most other people. And that is where we see people who are autistic, have various developmental language. I prefer to use the word difference. Differences, attention deficit, for example, synesthesia, various other conditions. And if we look at them that way, then we can start turning away from looking at autism and neurodivergence as a series of deficits, disorder, and disability, and remain true to the mission that we're all after, and that is working with the abilities and asking the question, what can that individual do? And there's a lot of it around. So estimates, most of the estimates seem to center on 20%. That's 1 in 5. So if your school has 5 or more students, one of them is going to be neurodivergent, and probably more, because more neurodivergent people tend to be attracted to the arts, music, and things like that. And then, of course, you have the community, too. So people who work in the schools, the parents, and others who are involved from the community. About 3% of us are autistic. That's a lot of autism. And so that's why it's good to know about it. Unfortunately, many females are still missed because females tend to be better at masking symptoms. Also, autism shows up a little bit differently, and just societal expectations. So if we have Karen over here who sits in the corner of the room, doesn't make eye contact, and keeps to herself, we say she's shy and don't think about it. But if Rick over here tries to pull that stunt, we won't necessarily say he's autistic, but at least it will be noticed.
If he starts walking, he is for sure.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And so these are some of the things that we need to be working on in terms of recognizing the female population of autistic individuals, high degree of mental challenges in neurodivergent. And there is a bit of a controversy as to whether it just runs right alongside and co-occurring, or it's an interesting thought experiment. What if the non-neurodivergent, non-autistic individual had to go through the same challenges of integrating into society, understanding the world, getting people to understand them, the challenges with employment and everywhere else? What would the rate of mental challenges be if that were the case? So something to keep in mind. And so you're going to tell us about the importance of music.
Oh yes, it crosses all borders. It's a universal language. It's the, how do you pronounce the
Pentatonic.
pentatonic scale? It goes everywhere. Shared experiences, fun and enjoyment. Like, it's very, very fun to engage in music. The time can just go by fast. It helps improve self-esteem. It's great to recognize greatness in everyone is very important. And a lot of people give lip service to embracing greatness in everyone, and they have this one group in the back of their mind, is everybody but that group. So I think it's important that everybody is embraced and recognized as being very important. Getting a job is also a very, as far as relating to music, you won't walk in there singing, but music helps with social skills, and it helps with being more comfortable. If you can sing in front of a group, you can talk more easily. Getting a job can be very, very challenging for people with autism because the way that they do the interviews, the way that they interact with the student, they have certain expectations, and they've been doing interviews the way that they've been doing them forever. I'd like to see that model change.
They're working on it. There are some companies who are smart enough to just dispense with the traditional interview process and perhaps provide some project-based.
That's good.
A project to complete, and then observing the candidates as to how they complete the projects. And that works much better.
And it helps them choose a career. Get in mind what they want to do when they grow up and get older. And then, of course, focusing on special interests. Follow the lead of the child. What do they want to do, not what you want to force them to do in your life. And through music, individual shared experiences bind them together.
Yeah, music is it's a common language for many people. I don't know if it's a universal language because while I like listening to the music of India and the Middle East with all the quarter tones, and we have 12 scales. They've got like 144, and the rhythms, I don't quite understand it the way they do. So that's why I'm not sure if music is a universal language, but it's a common language at the very least. So the power of music, you all know the power of music, but this is what we do when we want to demonstrate the power of music with tequila. So Karen couldn't stop because when I do stop, yeah, you have to do it. You have to complete it, and that's just an example of the power of music in terms of communication. So when teaching music, all right. So when teaching music, it's important to use music that's familiar and that's fairly linear and easy to understand. That is when teaching notation. So often I'll start with just the pitches themselves, and then things get more complicated as we move on. So let's take a look at an example of one way to teach music, one possible way that I use when I teach children on the spectrum how to read notation. And what I find is that my students, they're all over the spectrum. There's many spectrums in the world, but I'm talking about the autism spectrum. And what I mean by that is that some of them talk too much. Formerly, we were considered to have Asperger's syndrome, for example. And then there are others who don't speak and have a lot more challenges in communicating and just managing their daily lives. So this would be an example of a picture word schedule for a student who has more challenges. He had a few words here and there, but that wasn't his primary means of communication. Still, he could learn how to play the piano, 2 hands, independently. So what I'll do is I'll start out with gathering materials. And these materials already exist in the person's home, or if they don't, they're easy enough to get. They're easy enough to bring into the school. And so with these materials, we then go about constructing the materials that will be used to teach notation, because I feel that if a student is involved in co-creating the materials that they will then learn to use to learn notation, then it will be more meaningful to them. So we'll start out with a piece of paper, and I'll ask the student if they could draw some straight lines using a ruler, and we'll eventually end up with something like this, 7 sections, And again, wherever the student is, maybe I just tell the student or ask them to do the following. Maybe I have to show them an example. Maybe we have to do it hand over hand. However it gets done, it gets done. And the reason why I have 7 and not 8, because there's 7 note letters, and the autistic student would desperately want to fill in that 8th space. Now what will often happen is the line will go all the way down and we end up with an 8th space. And I could go the route, oh, you made a mistake, we better do it again. Or go with the flow and fill up this extra space with miscellaneous stuff, just so that it's full. So what is the first letter of the alphabet? A. Oh, gee, could you write an A in that first square? What comes next? And then we run it all the way down. Then we take the stickies. Usually I use the 3 by 4 inch yellow stickies, regulation size stickies. And we draw some lines on there as well. First, a line at the top where the sticky material is. And then we'll divide that into 8 segments. And 8's a good number because you can just divide it in half and divide it in half again and then divide it in half again. And then also soon you'll see why 8 is a good number. Well, then it's time to take the scissors. Oh, then we write the letters in there just like we did. And we can combine half B's and half C's and so on. And then we cut off the bottom and we cut them up one by one. So incidentally, we're working on motor control, writing, letter recognition, and other important things that may be important. And we put them all on this piece of paper to set up a sort of book. Now it's time to go to the keyboard. What do you think that first key would be? And depending upon the size of the keyboard, it could be different, but you get the idea. But in this case, it's C. Oh good, can you put a C sticker right between the black notes? Not towards the front, because then they get in the way when you try to play. And that's why there's 8, because if you cut it into 8 pieces, they fit nicely between the black keys. Oh, what's the next one? D, what's the next one? E, and so on. G, okay, let's start over, A. And once the student gets into that routine, we'll just run all the way up the keyboard. And then you can stop playing with the keyboard. Oh, could you find a D? Well, that's great. Could you find another D? Oh yeah, one over there. How about another one? How many of them are there? You can count them up. We can do the same with the rest of the letters. We can explore the keys. How many white keys are there? How many black keys are there? And usually students would count 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And one time I had a student, I asked this question, and she was like tapping the groups. And I almost said, no, don't tap them, just count them. But something told me to wait. And what she did is she created a mathematical formula in her head. So many groups of 2s times that number plus groups of 3s times however many times 3 occur, and then that single one up at the end. And she got it right. So sometimes it's good just to see where your student's going to go. Being neurodivergent, being autistic, they're probably going to go in a direction you don't expect. So you just wait. And then we'll make one of these. I won't talk much about what it is, but there's a lot of lines and a dashed line where little C is. Oh, could you take one of those notes and put it across that middle line? What do you think that might be anyways? Oh, it's a B. Okay, that's great. Not on the middle line, because on the middle line is actually in the C space. So it's important to be very particular about wording. You run it all the way up, and you run it all the way down. And sometimes it's by doing this, students get the concepts of forwards and backwards. All right, now can you take one of those stickies, the B, and put it across the B line? Or in this case, a G. Could you take a G and put it across the G line? Could you take 2 2 more of those. So we're working on other things too, such as counting. You can even spell words. Oh, that B over there, you put it there. Can you find the B on the keyboard? Can you find the A? And soon we're playing tunes. And that gets them ready, you might say, for piano book number 1. Well, not everybody plays the piano, and there are also many ways to go about this. You can get color-coded stickers to put on a keyboard or a 2-string bass, for example. So just the first 2 strings, not to complicate things, keep things simple. And also if the student is having a hard time due to sensory reasons, you can get raised stickers. So there's a more tactile effect. Sometimes it's challenging behaviors. So here's an example. A student I had teaching piano, and she did very well. She was a great pianist. She played both classical and jazz on the piano, and actually played piano better than I did. And she also loved to transpose. Oh, how would this sound like in C sharp? Then she'd play it. How does it sound like in B flat? And she'd go to, oh, how would you like to play it in D flat? No, that's okay. I'll just let you. I'd rather listen to you do it. I'm good at transposition, but I'm not that good, especially when it comes to sight reading. She has perfect pitch. One day, she decided she wanted to learn how to play the trumpet. Okay, next lesson, bring in a trumpet. First note on the trumpet is a G, so let's play an open G. Trumpet's a transposing instrument. So, anybody here familiar with the trumpet or transposing? So what comes out when you see a G, you play a G?
F.
Yeah, an F comes out. And if you have perfect pitch, that's going to cause some sort of cognitive dissonance, pun intended. Well, guess who had a meltdown? And guess who was a liar? I was a liar, the book was a liar, the trumpet was a liar, and we just couldn't continue. So what I did is I created what is known as a power card. So next lesson, I told her about a story. Well, this composer Beethoven, because Beethoven was important to her. But you use whatever composer is important to that student. And he would conduct his orchestra, and he'd have these instruments in the back, and they were transposing instruments. And so one note would be written here, but a different note would be over there. It just drove him mad. And we know Beethoven had meltdowns and tantrums. Some people say he was autistic. At the very least, he was neurodivergent. And so Beethoven would have these meltdowns. He'd beat up the concertmaster, he'd throw his stand at the musicians, he'd smash up his piano. But then he realized that this wasn't a good way to behave. So then we came up with some strategies that Beethoven used. Now talking to this kid, that you can implement. Listen to a favorite piece of music, get a hug from his mother, calm down, take a deep breath. And this is something that can be used for individuals or groups. So that's a strategy for dealing with that type of challenging behavior.
Yeah,
Go on.
yeah, and you were talking about all kinds of music for everybody, so I mean, we're not trying to push music or anything, but we love it. Like I said, I play the French horn. I mean, who knows, maybe I'll pick up the guitar now.
Yeah, that's one of the instruments I don't know how to play yet.
Yet. It was yet.
Social stories, often we hear about social stories for autistic and otherwise neurodivergent individuals, and this works for people who aren't neurodivergent as well. And so this lady, Jean Lyons, had an autistic, still has, an autistic son, now he's an adult, and when she talked to him, nothing would happen. But when she sang these stories to him, then he would understand and he would pay attention. And if we're really lucky, we might be able to hear. in the interest of time, love to listen to the whole thing. And the other 10, the other 10 tunes that are in there as well. We'll go back to our presentation, and oh, there we go. And there's the rest of them. So they're social stories in musical format. I've had students where if I talk to them on the phone about something, they're just off stimming away, not paying attention. But if I sing it to them, like if we're negotiating a change in lesson times, then they're right there, right on task. And that way music serves as a sort of carrier signal to organize his communication.
Yeah, as we've talked about, people on the spectrum have sensory issues, and it may be hypo or hypersensitive to sound, taste, touch, anything. I remember walking through Costco one day with Jonathan, my son, and he kept looking over to me and he'd say, "Do you hear that, Mom?" And I said, "No." And then later on he said, "Do you hear that?" I'm like, "No, I don't hear anything." So as we're leaving, the ticket lady that checks the tickets as we're leaving says, he walks up to her and says, "What's that? Do you hear that sound?" And she says, "You're a bird." And evidently what they do is they have this real high-pitched sound that only a few people can hear. And what they use that sound for is to chase the birds out of the ceilings, because otherwise they just would stay inside Costco. So he was very sensitive. He still is very sensitive to sound. They can hear through walls like Superman, but they hear all the interference in between a lot of times. So it can be a very challenging world for them with sound.
So music being auditorily based,
Yeah.
that's an important concept. Other aspects of sensory differences concern what are known as the inner senses, and those are the ones you see in the middle. These are sensations that come from within the body. The vestibular helps you keep your balance. The proprioceptive tells you where your body parts are in space and how much force to use to accomplish a task. So let's just try something. Everybody touch the back of your chair. All right, looks like you got it. All right, you can let go. How many of you took for granted you just knew where your back ended and where the chair began? You didn't have to visually locate it. Yeah, most people, but not so for autistic individuals. And if you don't know where your body is in the environment, if you don't know where to put your finger on the guitar fret or the bass fret, or just how hard to hold the stick, just like over there, I see this lady writing. How much concentration do you put into how hard you hold the pen? You just take it for granted and you move it around. Drumstick. You don't really think that much about how firmly you hold it. You just hold it with the right pressure. But autistic people may have to really think about that. How hard you strike the drum head and where. These are things that autistic people may need to think about consciously. And if you're thinking about all these little mechanics, how much is left for the creative process?
Oh, and that's one of the pictures out of my little Rain Man book.
Oh, yes. So often we hear about the hidden curriculum, which is used mostly to describe the difficulty that many autistic people have in perceiving unspoken rules. The unspoken rules. Things that are said between the lines, for example. But we can also think of the hidden curriculum of teaching, of how we can be most effective in terms of teaching our students. So on the left is what I so often hear in classrooms. And it very soon begins to sound like this. Wouldn't it be much better just to focus on these bullet phrases? Maybe write them on the board for students who have difficulty with auditory processing. And being clear in the rules. And talking through the natural consequences. I don't think I should learn how to play scales. I already learned to C major scale. This is stupid. I'm not going to play scales. I just want to play my music. Well, you can play music without learning your scales. but what are the consequences in terms of later on as we find scale-wise patterns in music? And what about your teacher? What's your teacher going to think if you're not practicing? And most of these things, everybody just goes through automatically. But for autistic and often other neurodivergent people, you may have to specifically talk about these things.
I can't speak about how important family is to these kids, like including the family in things that you're doing and trying to find out insights from the family. What works best, what doesn't work, what isn't working, and just take the hints from them. Friends are very hard to make for kids on the spectrum, and sometimes it helps to have mom or dad help to facilitate friendships, to invite kids over, and just try to be sensitive to the things that are important. You find the common interest of the person on the spectrum with what's going on. Another area of interest, and is really growing a lot now because our population is getting older, is they want to date. They want to know how to go out on dates, how to meet girls, how to meet guys. And yeah, I know you've probably seen Love on the Spectrum. Anybody? Yeah. So Danny Bowman is amazing.
Yeah, she really is. Yeah.
She's going to be working with us too. Yeah.
Well, here's another one.
Yeah.
Did you finish?
No, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. So the real life stuff is better than the stuff you can make up. So as a trombonist, I like learning nothing more than spending hours in the high school instrument closet, learning all the different instruments and figuring them out, as I mentioned before. However, I was absent from jazz band rehearsal more often than being there. So what is the cause of this unexpected, challenging behavior, and what can we do about it? And as we think about possible causes, doing what is known as a functional behavior assessment, and what that means is that you learn the root cause of the behavior. All right, well, maybe I don't like jazz. If that's the case, that has a certain solution. I don't like the band director. Well, the band director's fine during concert band. No, not that. Maybe I don't get along with my classmates. Maybe the trombone hasn't been cleaned in 5 years and it's really disgusting and gross. That has a different solution. It was none of the above. The trumpets were too loud. We'd sit in front of the trumpets. And that was an auditory overload, an auditory violation, as I refer to it as. No matter how many times I talked to the band director about it, well, let's just say nobody knew anything about hearing sensitivities or autism or much of anything else then. So what's the next logical behavior? Don't go. Well, then one day I did my homework and I marched into the band director's office with a set of alternate seating charts to get the trombones away from in front of the trumpets. And I demanded he make a change in typical Asperger fashion. It didn't work. But now I know a lot more about effective self-advocacy. And it probably would work now, given that people know a lot more about sensory issues.
Now we talk about abstract versus concrete thinking. A lot of people think in very concrete terms. Like they think that it's exactly as it appears. Like, well, you say raining cats and dogs, and he might look up to the sky to see if cats and dogs are falling out, which is one of the pictures. The door slamming, Temple Grandin uses that, and what she talks about with that is that when she walks up to people in a crowd, she feels like the doors are slamming on her socially, and it's hard for her to engage in a conversation. And then reading facial expressions, you have to teach kids what a facial expression means. Like when the corners of your mouth go up, that means they're happy or it's sad. And there's different programs that teach, like Emotive Play is one of them, that teach the teachers how to teach the different facial expressions. There's a lot of books too.
Yeah, there are. There's a lot of resources on that.
Because they don't take it for granted, and they don't read between the lines, so they miss a lot of jokes.
Exactly. So, some more good reasons to be involved in music. If you take an fMRI of somebody listening to music, you'll see all areas of the brain light up. Now, if you take the same person and you get them playing a keyboard or another instrument, then the brain lights up like a Christmas tree. And as we've talked about before, music is communal. There's all kinds of examples of communal singing, dancing together, religious ceremonies, festivals, and even drum circles to campfires. And it is music that is great for binding people together.
Yeah, so in management, tips for staff, teaching kids is important really to observe confidentiality, because some people don't want to disclose that they have a label. Some people do want to disclose they have a label because it helps understand. And as far as labels go, if you understand what you're working with, you understand what kind of areas you can impact their lives, like sensory, behavior, and communication, how it affects social skills, how it affects relationships. If you just work on those areas from the outside in and not focus so much on the label, but if they want to talk about their label, that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with the label. It's just that some people tend to label people and think of it as a bad thing from the past. So, I mean, I think autism is a beautiful word. And some of my best friends are autistic. Like this guy.
Well, I'll agree with you on that. So, music impacts learning across multiple domains. And when I'm talking about going beyond listening to music as background to help you study, but it's using music actively. So you may have heard of various mathematical concepts that are taught using rap, for example. And that's an example of using music. Everybody moves better to music. I've yet to see a Zumba class that doesn't have musical accompaniment.
Communication and behavioral health. There's speech and language tools you can use if someone's non-speaking. We like to say non-speaking, not non-verbal, because they can be very verbal, but they're not necessarily speaking. Common behavior interventions, there's different types of behavioral interventions like ABA, CERTs, different RDI, lots of different ways of intervening with the behavior at an early age. It's important to do this at an early age, and that's getting more into early intervention. But it's all very important. Music, art, and sound therapy are also really good vehicles to teach a child with. Occupational therapy, and sometimes you have to use medications.
And it's so important to focus on what the neurodivergent or autistic person can do.
Mm-hmm.
And given that widely varying skill set, we need to find ways to make use of these strengths and abilities to provide fulfilling and productive lives, and to make fulfilling and productive lives the rule rather than the exception. Every autistic person I know who is successful has found a way to parlay their interests and their skills into something that society values. And usually that translates into some sort of employment.
Right, and we're trying to get it so it's not so much just in the tech field, maybe more in the arts and the music area too.
And also for individuals who need more supports. So for example, I know of a fellow who he loves folding laundry. He does it perfectly. How many of you would like help with your laundry? He'll be the first one to come out here and help you too, but you have to pay him to do it because that's his job. And he does it all day, better, faster, and with more enthusiasm than anybody else. So, what's next?
What's next?
What's next is we have made the training that's in the instructor training available to everyone in School of Rock. So anyone can take that no matter what role they're in. You register through Practice Space like for any other training. You just select it from the drop down, and now all of your staff can take that training as well, from student coordinators to owner operators, everyone. So we're very excited about that, and we really thank you
Oh,
today for your presentation.